The Boston Tea Party is one of the most famous moments of the American Revolution. However, Boston was not the only city to rebelliously dump tea. In fact, it wasn't even the first. From South Carolina to New York, here's 17 other tea parties that occurred during the American Revolution. First off, why exactly were there so many protests about tea? The catalyst for the tea parties actually started with the Townshend Act of 1767, which not only taxed tea, but also lead, paint, paper, and glass. This act, however, did not last, and the British repealed it in 1770. Although the British repealed most of the Townshend Act's taxes, the tax on tea still remained, and in 1773 they decided to pass the Tea Act, making it so the British East India Company had a virtual monopoly on all colonial tea trades, greatly reducing the number of viable colonial-run tea operations, especially smuggled tea, which consisted of 90% of the tea consumed by Americans. Although the Boston Tea Party is the most famous tea party, the Charleston Tea Party is actually the first instance of a tea-based protest in the colonies. Charleston, in fact, had 3 separate protests on tea. However, only the first one predates Boston's, occurring 9 days before, when an East India Company ship named the London sailed into harbor carrying 257 chests of tea. Outraged, the people of Charleston refused to allow the tea to be unloaded, causing it to sit for 2 days. Led by Christopher Gadsden, the boycotters convinced the merchants to help their cause by placing the tea in the governmental exchange building. A second Charleston Tea Party occurred in July 1774, when a British merchant ship named the Magna Carta registered 3 crates of tea with the city's Royal Customs Office. Upon learning of this, the city's representatives, also known as the General Committee, asked Captain Richard Maitland to explain his conduct, as they deemed it contrary to the sense of this colony in particular, and of America in general. According to the captain, he had not realized that the tea was on board his ship until he set sail. Even though the General Committee believed him, Maitland offered to destroy the tea at his own cost. However, Maitland failed to destroy his cargo, causing an angry mob of colonists to march to his ship in order to tar and feather him. Fortunately for the captain, he spotted the mob and escaped to a British ship, though his tea cargo was taken by the colonists. Third and final Charleston Tea Party occurred 4 months later in November 1774. It just so happened that the ship Maitland escaped to, the Britannia, appeared in Charleston Harbor carrying 7 crates of tea. Again, the General Committee summoned the captain of the Britannia, Samuel Ball, Jr., to explain himself, and just like Captain Maitland, Samuel Ball stated that he had no knowledge of the tea aboard his ship. The committee also bought his story and blamed 3 Charleston importers, Robert Lindsay, Zephaniah Kinsley, and Robert Mackenzie, who simply dumped the tea in the water. Yes, the Boston Tea Party wasn't even the second tea protest, but the second one was in Massachusetts, Lexington, Massachusetts, where they brought together all of their tea in order to burn it in a huge bonfire. Finally, we have the Boston Tea Party as the third tea party. In December 1773, 3 ships arrived in Boston Harbor: the Beaver, the Dartmouth, and the Eleanor. Most Bostonians agreed that the tea must not be offloaded, as the tax would be paid the moment it was. Lieutenant Governor and Chief Justice of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, refused to let the ships return to England, however. The Sons of Liberty, a group of colonial merchants and tradesmen founded to protest forms of taxation, began to discuss what to do. On December 16, 1773, 100 protesters, disguised as Native Americans, dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. The value of the chests was nearly $2 million in today's money. However, that was just the first tea party in Boston. On March 16th of 1774, 60 men boarded a ship and threw 28 chests of tea overboard. The next protest was a few days later on Christmas Day in Philadelphia, where the British tea ship Polly, captained by Ares, reached Chester, Pennsylvania with 697 chests of tea. 2 days later, a mass meeting of 8,000 Philadelphians in the State House yard, the largest in the American colonies up to that point, determined that the tea should be refused and that the vessel should sail to Delaware Bay. Captain Ares, influenced mostly by the warning from the Committee of Tarring and Feathering, sailed back to Britain. The last protest of 1773 occurred on the last day of 1773 in Provincetown, Massachusetts. The locals seized the tea and took it to the fort at Castle Island, but 7 men dressed as Mohawks took it and burned it. In January 1774, at Princeton University in New Jersey, the students broke into the college's storeroom of tea and burned almost a dozen pounds. The next Tea Party was the New York Tea Party, though it could also be claimed by Sandy Hook, New Jersey. On April 18th, 1774, the Nancy, commanded by Captain Benjamin Lockyer, landed at Sandy Hook with a cargo of 698 cases of tea from the East India Company. The locals took charge of his ship and escorted him into the city of New York, where he agreed to return to England. 4 days later, the ship London arrived, captained by Chambers. He claimed that he had no tea aboard, but the local Sons of Liberty learned that there were 18 chests of tea being smuggled on board. Chambers and his ship were quickly seized, and the chests dumped into the Hudson River. The Sons of Liberty even took the empty tea chests to ignite bonfires in the streets. Although Chambers was threatened, he managed to escape on the Nancy. If you like these history videos and want to join a history community, you should join my Discord server where you can chat about this channel or just general history. And if you're one of the first 100 people in the server, you'll get a special OG role. There's about 90 spots left, link in description. The Chestertown Tea Party is by far the least verified event, since the first mention of this tea party came in an 1899 booklet about the town, over 100 years after the event supposedly occurred. The story goes that on May 13th, citizens of Chestertown boarded a ship at the town wharf and dumped tea into the Chester River. But again, there's no primary source for the event. Despite its questionable origins, the town still commemorates a tea party event every year. Even women took part in the tea protests. In spring 1774 in Wilmington, North Carolina, town women took to the streets to burn their tea. The details on this are limited, with only one Scottish visitor, Janet Shaw, accounting for the event. She stated that the sacrifice was not very considerable, as I do not think anyone offered above £1/4. On September 15th, 1774, in York, Massachusetts, James Donnell's ship, Cynthia, sailed into the port of Falmouth, carrying 150 pounds of tea. The local patriots, dressed as natives, quickly seized the tea, but instead of destroying it, the tea was put into a nearby building and returned to the merchant shortly after. On October 19th, 1774, in Annapolis, Maryland, Anthony Stewart, captain of Peggy Stewart, carried 2,320 pounds of tea and 50 indentured servants. When he arrived in Annapolis, he discovered his tea cargo. His choice was either to dock and pay the tax or return to England and his damaged ship. He decided to pay the tax, but a mob of angry locals insisted that he not only burn his cargo, but his ship as well. They marched to his residence and even constructed a gallows. Fearing for his safety, as well as the safety of his wife and newly born baby, Captain Stewart agreed and burned his ship. Yorktown, Virginia, the place where the Revolutionary War's last major battle would be fought almost a decade later, had a tea party on November 7th, 1774. The Virginian arrived carrying 2 half chests of tea, with the townspeople pouring it into the York River. Final tea party occurred in Greenwich, New Jersey on December 22nd, 1774, nearly a year after the Boston Tea Party. Captain J. Allen and his ship Greyhound were transporting tea to Philadelphia. However, they changed course to Greenwich to avoid possible conflict with colonists. When they arrived in Greenwich, the tea was stored in British sympathizer Dan Bowen's cellar, but unfortunately for him, the Greenwich citizens learned of the tea and broke into the cellar, setting it on fire.